This is Christina Cadill with Radiant Astrology, and this is take two for our podcast on Mercury retrograde and the solar eclipse. We just got totally eclipsed by my technology, but thank you so much to my guest, Melissa LaFara from Energetic Principles, for her patience. We knew that we weren't going to completely get away scot-free with Mercury stationing retrograde today. But let's
Yeah.
maybe we could just start over. So Melissa, thank you so much for joining me. You're the host of Energetic Principles podcast and are just launching your Tarot of Her, which is super exciting, which I can't wait to get mine. But for our podcast listeners who don't know you, would you mind introducing yourself?
Yeah, I'm Melissa LaFara. I'm the host of the Energetic Principles podcast, which turns 6 this year, this April. And I host a monthly podcast where I have guests come on and we talk all things astrology and break down the granular transits that happen to us every day and look at the wider picture of them. I'm also a practicing astrologer, and so I do private consultations and with astrology and tarot. And what Christina just said, I have a tarot deck coming out called Tarot of Her that I did with my wonderful friend Sarah Jane Lambert, and that is coming Earthside here probably in June. So you can find me at energeticprinciples.com and tarotofher.com.
Perfect. And I'm super excited about your tarot deck coming out. And I love all of your tarot spreads that you post on Instagram for all of the lunations and things like that. They're amazing.
Yeah, there I have been doing that for a while. Yeah. So if you like to interact with your own deck or oracle deck, I do post spreads there for each lunation to, and you're gonna want to look at the eclipse big, right, Christina?
Well, I hope that you do one for the eclipse. And of course, when you get your
Yeah.
tarot of her out, I'm expecting some spreads
Some
from you.
special spreads, yeah.
Spread them, baby.
Spread them.
So, we were talking about Mercury retrograde. And so in Aries, right? Aries is that impulse to want to get something started, something new, something fresh, especially it being Aries season with, Mercury going retrograde in Aries and the solar eclipse coming April 8th. And today, April 1st, Mercury stationing retrograde. And so, when we have a Mercury retrograde, it's a real call to go inward, and to reflect on things too, on our Aries house, however, wherever this falls in your chart, but also sort of our Martian energy, which is like our ability to assert ourselves. And at times we need to stand up for ourselves, defend ourselves, but also, where that doesn't serve us, I would think, because also being eclipsed, perhaps we find that, life isn't just, a sprint up to the top, you know, that we need to be able to, moderate and manage that Martian energy because not everything it needs to turn into a conflict or not everything needs to turn into competition or a battle. And with Mercury retrograding during this eclipse period, it makes me think of, having to think twice or rethink things or revise your plans when you're, even if we feel like, okay, we're going to have this great fresh start. I wouldn't put everything, all the eggs in the one basket until we've, made it through Mercury retrograde, because oftentimes new information comes to light that may, make us think differently about our plans or think differently about the aim, that we're aiming toward. So what's coming up for you with this solar eclipse and Mercury retrograde?
So Mercury retrograde, it's interesting because when we think about the Martian impulse behind it, we have a Mars in Pisces, a Mars in Pisces that is moving to actually make a conjunction with Saturn that will happen around the time that we have the solar eclipse. So even what you were speaking to just moments ago about that sort of tempering the impulse, and we can't always rocket ahead. There's this slowing down of the Aries energy. There's a spiritualization of the Aries energy going on. And I think one of the and an intuitive part of it, right? It's almost like intuition is speaking with instinct. And rather than moving forward, we have to kind of feel things through first. And one of the big things that's coming up for me with the Aries, just Aries energy in general, but thinking about the retrograde, and having Mercury retrograde in fire signs, right? It's not just this one, we're going to have it throughout the year. But fire is all about sort of our joie de vivre, what's our passion, what's our purpose, what are we living for, what gets us excited about life, what feels like we are in the creative act of living, and how are we living that, and how is our mind aligned with that. And so I think there will be some of these bigger questions of like how we're growing and changing, and what sparks our spirit, and opening new doors there. But it's not a straight out the gate sort of thing.
Hmm. Yeah, so thank you for mentioning that Mars, which rules Aries, is in Pisces, and at the April 8th solar eclipse is coming up to a conjunction with Saturn. So that likely would be some kind of a block in the forward momentum, or perhaps, either having to be more patient, or having to, maybe it's a no, and maybe you need to go back to the drawing board. I always like that quote from Abe Lincoln where he said something like, if you give me 10 hours to chop down a tree, I'll spend 9 of them sharpening the axe, or something like that, like making sure that we have that sharpened Mars. But it being in Pisces, to me, the card I keep pulling up with my Oracle deck lately is this one that says it's like the covenant, the sacred contract. And I feel like it's saying, yes, there's that ego energy in Aries that seems very sort of present, and it's in our conscious world. It's like, how am I going to make the most of my goals in my life right now? But that Piscean, 12th house from Aries also is kind of
Mhm.
like, what's behind it? What is where you're going orientated to what your ultimate sort of dream is, rather than just like the next achievement or the next, ego
Yeah.
gratifying thing.
Yeah, I love that, Christina, because it reminds me of something I actually just witnessed Sam Reynolds talking about on Instagram the other day, when he was talking about this upcoming eclipse. And he said, and he was speaking more to men in the actual Instagram reel, but I think this can apply to all of us, is just because I can do something, should I? And so that really speaks to what you were just talking about, because we can do anything. Our ego can go after whatever, but is it really in the best interest? Is it in the spirit's interest? Do we have, like, is the I, outweighing sort of the we, or the collective, or the dream, or just the more spiritual connotation of what we have to still experience, or like these soul contracts, whether that's with partners, whether that's with ourselves. And so, yeah, the ego can get a little rowdy, and then all of a sudden you make moves and you're like, oh my God, what did I destroy? Now I'm all blocked, and yeah.
It reminds me of something a Jungian analyst, Joseph Lee, had said. He's the host of this Jungian Life podcast, and he was my analyst for a while.
Oh, I love him.
And he's amazing. And I'm actually in their dream school. So, I
Oh, I was thinking
figured
about taking that. Yeah,
you
okay.
should. Well, I will say that during the holidays, they had some kind of a special going on. So I don't know. They
Mm.
have them now and then, but it's totally cool. It's totally worth it. And he does these monthly calls them Q&As, but it's more of his sort of darshan, which I love. And he was talking about the self, right? Because in Jungian psychology, the self with a capital S is like, it's where the unconscious and the conscious are merged. And that's kind of like the higher, sort of sense of self. But he said that the ego is what we normally associate with consciously. And that's very much, I think, when I think of sun in Aries, the sun exalted in Aries, that's very much that ego energy that we actually do need a strong ego in order to advocate for ourselves and get stuff done in the world. But, you know, we could have an overdominant ego with all this Aries happening and all the power surge that might come after the solar eclipse. Um, but what Joseph had said was that, oftentimes we're living through the ego, and we could say, for instance, there's a job that we say, oh, this is the job I want. I could totally do this. I'm going to kill it in the interview. And then you work so hard to even just get the interview and everything like that. And then the day of the interview, maybe you sleep right through the alarm clock, or you forget to even set the alarm clock. And then it's like, could that be the self protecting you from something that actually isn't? Your ego said it sounds like a great idea for me to be like CEO of blah, 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 but maybe the self is saying, this isn't really you. This isn't really where you need to go. And that was all in the context of sometimes the self can maybe work against what seems like against the ego, but in order so that, we know where we're really going,
Yeah.
and oftentimes when we experience like rejection or a path doesn't open to us, it may be because they're either people in our environment or our own destiny senses that that's just not the right path for us.
Yeah. And I think that's a big part of this solar eclipse energy that's coming is it has that pathfinding and that way making sort of energy where the fresh start, the fresh start is here. And we don't walk through, we don't take the first step per se right when the solar eclipse happens. Much of the astrology is really poignant more so in May. But it's all an incubation period right now. And we've probably all felt that. I don't know about you, Christina, but I've felt that. Really, we could all almost take this back to thinking about the first Aries solar eclipse back in last April. And that was kind of when some of this Aries energy was incubating. And this one has just more of, when we get to totality, obviously it's going to be much stronger. But I feel like there has been sort of this Aries incubation for a very long time, and it is just ramping up. And May is kind of wild, in my mind. But yeah.
Ooh, you're gonna have to tell us what you have in mind, but let's take it one step at a time. So we've got I already did a podcast on Mercury retrograde, but just to sort of, reiterate and review that, it's pretty much from April 1st to 25th is the actual retrograde period. So we can consider April being the month of Mercury retrograde. And which is a time, it's really, take the time to rethink things, to think things through, to be open to new information coming to light. I have often experienced that if there's something like, say, for instance, my husband and I have a vacation planned in May, and it's been planned, and we already have all the reservations and everything. And then just like yesterday, I was like, oh my gosh, one of our Airbnbs is like an hour away from where we need to be of this
Oh.
place we're going to for several days. So I was like, should we change it? Did it? But my husband was like, no, I'm happy. I'll drive an hour. That's fine. It's like, we've got this great Airbnb for a great price. So I was like, yeah, I better not touch anything right now. Let's see what happens, by the end of April. And if I still feel like I need to change things, I will. But oftentimes, if we mess around with things during the Mercury, sometimes during the Mercury retrograde, things come to light and things need to be revised and changed. Maybe we messed, we forgot something or we overlooked something. I also feel though that if sometimes just out of that that Mercury retrograde anxiety that usually happens during every Mercury retrograde. There's a certain amount of anxiety, and in the Mars sign, it could be impatience with anxiety, you know. That's not usually a good recipe for making good decisions. But as you said, with the eclipse in Aries on April 8th, we were, especially I would say the 3 days before, that balsamic moon,
Mm,
those days leading up to the eclipse can be especially where we feel like we can't really see, we don't really know what's going on. And in that spaces, we're meant to just sort of, experience it and maybe just pause and not make any major decisions out of fear or out of, just being in darkness, or
mm,
out of a sense of, I feel threatened that I can't, I don't have my usual, confidence or whatever, then I'm going to make some kind of a reaction out of that. I think, as you said, it could likely be a sense of it going forward, what inside needs to change and shift. And I really experienced that during the last solar eclipse in Aries, which was right on my IC, the root of my chart last year, and for me, I really just became obsessed with the power of now, and how Eckhart Tolle talks about the pain body that we just tend to, most people, most all of us are kind of addicted to pain, to giving pain or receiving pain. And that's just kind of how we operate. And that most of the pain that we either experience or that we give out is just so unnecessary. And that's
mm.
really what it's all about. And so, to me, I feel like, if those of you who are having this eclipse or Mercury retrograde in like the bottom of the chart, the third or fourth house, it doesn't sound sexy to be like, oh, work on your inner development, but it can be really profound at a time like this. It was for me.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all anything on the outside is derived from the inside. So you might as well clear that up. And I mean, I think it's very timely that you even brought up the pain body, because one of the big factors of this solar eclipse is that it's conjunct Chiron,
Chiron.
which
Mhm.
yeah, which we definitely have to talk about. So I'm just going to insert that there, but I want to talk to you what you're saying about the balsamic moon and how important it is leading up to here, because of just the nature of all the planets that are in Pisces, right? We got that Mars Saturn conjunction, we got Neptune, and that balsamic phase is going to take place in Pisces, going over all these, what we might call kind of tricky planets. And so think about Pisces being this spiritualized energy where we're in, the great ocean of consciousness, and we're in this balsamic phase, and like you said, we're in the dark and we're swimming. Imagine swimming in the dark. And I don't know if you've ever gone swimming when it's like the phosphorescence, and you're like, and you move your hands and it all glows around you, but it's like it's the only thing lighting the way. Like it has this like kind of primordial sort of amniotic energy to it right before we go, walk through the eclipse door. And so that whole weekend, April 5th, 6th, 7th, leading up, like you said, Christina, it's not anything about pushing to the next thing. It's not, it's almost like letting go and surrendering to the what is happening within and how things are changing, and yeah, just tuning into the spirit.
Yeah, and I think that's so important, to, even if we can take some space to just feel a little more cleansed, whether that means, for some people, fasting, might be what their body is calling for. For others, it could just be rest. And, there is that excitement around chasing the eclipse, right, in North America.
Mm,
And of course, people are cashing in on it, like, Delta or some one of these airlines is like, we're gonna be flying next to the eclipse. They actually have a couple flights like to, I don't know, chase the eclipse totality or something. And they say that along the path, all of these hotels and everything are being booked up. Even here where I'm at in Southwest Virginia, I think they said we're gonna get 88% totality. And I don't know, I personally, I feel like definitely if you're, I think what you'd said earlier when we were discussing this, that if people feel called to it, then, by all means do it. I mean, I was in the eclipse totality in 2017, and that was beautiful and profound, and it was so spiritual. And we were in nature, and I was with friends, and then after that, I didn't have anything catastrophic happen in my life after that. So luckily, fortunately, um, I feel like for me, for this eclipse, I don't know. Because it's in Aries, it's conjunct Chiron. Mercury retrograde will be conjunct Eris, which we need to talk about too. I want to retreat. I kind of want my own time, in my own personal space. And this is how I'm thinking I'm feeling now, and feeling that call to do more of that, being with myself, being with, my loved ones, um, not really chasing after this eclipse totality. What are your thoughts on this eclipse chasing for this eclipse?
Yeah, I mean, it's good for business. It's like when we have this, once in a lifetime experience for many people. I mean, we get lucky, right? With lucky in quotes, America with our double I guess we could say back to back in the concept of time, total solar eclipses in 2017 and then now. Uh it's yeah, it's an attraction, and it's exciting, and it's a way to connect with the bigger cycles of nature and things in our smallness of being alive on the earth, and how magnanimous, these beings of light, like the sun and in the moon, and what pulls us and draws us. It's hard not to like, it's like the idea of like a train wreck. You gotta look, like, it doesn't, it's almost like you just feel compelled to look. But so I don't think there's any right or wrong about it. And I know the ancients were like, it's malevolent, don't look directly at it, maybe look at the ground, watch that shadow. But yeah.
Well,
But
supposedly it's an intimacy between the sun and the moon.
yeah.
And I know that I really have a lot of reverence for the fact that it's conjunct the lunar nodes, which to me, I don't see the lunar nodes as malevolent. I feel like they're about realignment, and
I
sometimes
hear
that
that.
realignment is difficult if we're so out of alignment. And sometimes it can be, really, wonderful to feel like, wow, my life has meaning, my life has purpose, and this is what it is. And I'm being just reorientated to that. I think
Well,
ideally.
yeah, and what you're saying is important for the solar eclipse just in general, right? Because it's the idea of the life-giving sun being blotted out. And so what does that look like for us? And when that's gone for a moment, because it's here all the time. I mean, obviously not at night, but we have the constancy of that. So to experience day without the light bringer is profound, and sort of, it's almost like the reboot, when your system blips and you have to, like, reboot everything, and it kind of gives that fresh start, or that fresh perspective. Yeah, it's just an invitation to, it's really an invitation to a different consciousness that is hopefully, like you said, more aligned with what the soul is here to experience. And yeah, and so how aligned are we? And if we're not, then there will be some challenges.
Yeah, and the solar eclipse conjunct Chiron in Aries. I know I was really especially paying attention to Chiron Aries. I'm the Chiron and Aries generation. Are you? I think we're kind of
I
close in
am
age.
Taurus.
Okay,
I
so you're a
am,
little
yeah.
behind. And so I feel like a lot of the lesson for Chiron and Aries is the lesson around that Aries sort of defense around our wounds. That can be one of them. I actually had a therapist one time. We weren't talking about astrology at all, but she had said that, we have this sort of natural need to protect ourselves in a way where we have this armor that protects like the most, sort of the wounded child within. And I kind of see Chiron in Aries as potentially that. Also, the wound around, sort of that Martian energy. I have a lot of female clients that, like, have maybe done a lot of great things in the world, but just feel like, gosh, I am so tired of having to be so strong and competitive and, all this masculine energy. They just want to, not live in a constant fight or flight sort of mode.
Yeah.
Um, and, during the pandemic, when we had, I believe it was like when Chiron, I know it was when Chiron was newly in Aries. Um, was it conjoined the North Node? Well, it's almost pretty much conjoined the North Node now, but I can't remember what it was, but I do remember with during the pandemic, Chiron was in Aries, and there was a lot of this energy of, the doctors and nurses, they were, on the front lines. And not only did they have to just keep working overtime to figure out what to do with all these people dying, before there was a vaccine, but then they also got a lot of, all that kind of disinformation of people like, how dare you give people vaccines? They're killing people, or whatever. Like they had to deal with, they were essentially our frontline warriors. And not that this would be the same exact thing from back then, but there is something about, going into battle, even if, you're doing something noble and you still being attacked or you still having to fight, some kind of a battle and feeling burnt and bruised and everything like that. Um, and where is that sort of inner knowing that you're on the right path. And I think with Chiron, it's knowing that if you are there to heal your wound and help others to heal, in that space of healing, then there is something purposeful in that. I don't know. What are your thoughts around the Chiron and Aries?
Yeah, that's it's interesting because I mean, when we think about the myth of Chiron, Chiron was the healer, was the teacher, was the one that could heal everyone else. But then when he got in the way, got in the way of someone else being wounded, another centaur wounded, that is when he got the wound and received the poison from, Heracles and that he couldn't get rid of himself, right? And so it always brings up the poisons that live within us that, as much as we can help the world and like put it out there and be this force beyond us, it's like we still carry this thing that it's hard to purge. And it's not always like great pains or great wounds. It could be like the little things that are always just, peeling away at us or pecking at us and and that we do to ourselves, sort of the self wound, if we think about just Aries, or how those poisons and those pains and those stories affect the ability to really live and be yourself. And so, and then when thinking about sort of the nature of how Chiron got the wounding to begin with, like there's sort of an injustice there, right? He was just trying to get in the way of this other centaur, and no one was aiming for him. And so it's sometimes it's these things too that are just beyond our control, and dealing with the unfairness of life and having to be okay with that, because sometimes that's out of our control. And if we keep letting that
Mhm.
poison get to us and affect us, and our effectiveness and our ability to really live in life, then it's kind of on us in some. I guess I'm saying taking responsibility for the self
Mhm.
and sort of the pain body that you were talking about earlier that's present in all of us. No one's free from it. We all have
Mhm.
it, whether you have Chiron and Aries or not. We all have it.
Mhm. Yeah, and the fact that what always struck me about the Chiron myth was that he had this wound that would never heal, but his attempts to try to heal it, he had all these great discoveries and things like that. But then also he was an immortal. And so he would have been
Yeah.
forever, wounded and in pain, great pain. And so, didn't he ask the gods to then
Yeah.
make him mortal so then he could die so they can get, finally be free from this pain? And I think there's a lot when we look at, Chiron as a signature or by transit that, it's about connecting to our humility and our humanity, that Chiron can actually get beyond the, our defenses of, oh, yeah, I just have to look perfect and be perfect and all this stuff. But with Chiron, we can't connect to our fellow humans unless we've, experienced some sense of vulnerability. I mean, that's how we can really be compassionate to another. And I think that's an important aspect of Chiron. So hopefully with the solar eclipse, whatever this collective Chiron experience could turn out to be, I'm hoping that ultimately it helps us connect to our humanity. And
Yeah.
and we can learn how to process, to accept and actually integrate our vulnerability as, a valuable part of ourselves.
Yep. It's and yeah, it's in our personal lives and we see it in the world. I mean, the world is at war in many aspects. And yeah, that the warring factions are going to be brought up. What are we in war with? Where is aggression placed? How is aggression used? I think that's another it's a very Aries thing, but it's also
Mhm.
a Chiron and Aries thing. It's like where is aggression purposeful? Aggression versus assertion. And
Mhm.
yeah.
And let's see, I also had noticed that Eris is conjunct, let me see, Mercury retrograde. Let's see, where is it? Let me see. Oh, here it is. At the eclipse, it's, yes, they're both at 24 Aries. Um, and that to me, I don't know, do you work with Eris much? I don't a lot, but when it's present this this much prevalent, then yes, I would say there's something significant there. So Mercury retrograde on Eris, maybe there is some, revealing of information on some kind of subversive element like Eris, subversive chaotic element, maybe revealing something that has gone on, or just that a lot of the news, because oftentimes like what's happening in the news, we see that with Mercury, we see that with Jupiter, is some report about like the chaos in the world. I don't know. What are your thoughts on
Yeah.
that?
Well, and it's not like I don't work with Eris that much, but I mean, this kind of comes back to what we were just talking about with Chiron energy too, is it's like, okay, we're going to take that information in and we know it exists. And then what does it do to us? What do we do because of it? There's a lot of just, and do we feel empowered by it? Do we feel powerless by it? Uh, and so there can just be these bigger forces of chaos at work that we are very aware of. And that could be humbling, that can be angering, um, but it can also be in a different sense of chaos, because really if we break down chaos beyond, like from more of like the kind of creation energy or creation myth kind of vibe, chaos is essentially that really creative void before everything blooms or starts, right? So chaos is not necessarily a bad thing all the time. It really just depends upon the context of which we're experiencing it in. So I don't know if that makes any sense, but that's kind of where my mind's going with it.
Mm. Yeah, well, the heiress, her story was, it seemed very much like um just being in that the kind of chaotic energy that kind of comes from maybe striking out on something where you feel like you've been rejected or not been a part of or something like that. I mean, we'll see. Sometimes the mythology is just sort of a general kind of theme to reflect on, but I don't know. I often see it as I don't know why they say it's like the feminine, blah, blah, blah. I mean, sometimes I think it was during the Me Too and stuff that was all this Eris. I can't remember what the aspect was. But fortunately, women have, that's been one of the good things about like this women being more empowered, because when things need to be spoken out about, like now, a lot of women feel like they can speak out and they'll be heard, and it won't
Mhm.
necessarily be, um, that they can actually get some justice. So,
Yeah, and I mean, even just thinking about that, if we want to like just think about women in general, and we know there's a lot of women's issues going on, especially here in America right now. And one of the players we haven't really talked about much is actually Venus, who's over in Aries as well, and she is in her what is known as her detriment state, where she's a fiery Venus and Mars's sign. Um, so that doesn't place, the so that feminine energy in the I don't want to say it's a good or bad placement. It's not that at all, but it's adding that fire and that vigor to Venus, and maybe what she has to stand up for, or like, and have maybe more of those masculine qualities, or take the stand, take the fight. Um, so it's just one of those things where this is the beauty of all these major alignments is we can talk about it all we want, but the fun is actually watching it all unfold, right? And then we're like, oh, well, that
yeah.
makes sense with that, and that makes sense with that, and yeah, good old hindsight.
Well, I will say, like, I recorded my Mercury retrograde episode, and then I had to go back and do a little addendum because I had just read about that Andrew Huberman,
Mm,
who is like some influencer, well, he's scientist, a Stanford scientist, and who became had a big podcast and everything like that. And but he was, I guess there was some expose. Did you hear about this?
I did, yeah, with a bunch of affairs, or just kind of juggling
Yeah,
women.
yes, but it was like psychopathic. Like he was juggling six women at a time, lying to all of them. Like, I think maybe in the past it might have been like, oh, he's just a single guy. But
He's
now it's
just a
like, wait.
man.
But it's like, look at the damage you could do to somebody when you think you're in in a monogamous relationship, and you use that to say, oh no, we're not going to use protection. And then the person, the woman's decision is because of, oh, well, we're going to be safe because we're monogamous, like there's
Yeah,
all kinds of things there.
yeah.
But to me, I was like, wow, like at the time, Venus, let's see, I think at the Mercury station now, Venus is conjunct Neptune. Oh
She's
yeah, so
almost,
she
yeah.
was
Hmm.
conjunct Neptune. So well, wait, let me see.
She's about to be as we record this, but she
Okay,
will have conjunct before the
conjoined
eclipse.
him. Yeah, so we have, let's see. Yes, so she's at 25 Pisces as we record this. So she's about to conjoin Neptune, which to me, I feel like it is almost that release of that, because what happened was a lot of these women connected and they shared their sorrows, and they shared their anger, which turned to sorrow, which turned to, you know, who knows what, which maybe compassion for one another or what have you. And it's very much, with Mercury retrograde, like going back over something that happened in the past that now is, it's a time to be revealed. And then I know we probably want to wrap up soon, but by the time the solar eclipse, Venus will be in Aries, right? So there will be that sort of more empowered, emboldened Venus, Venusian feminine energy. um, I'm interested to see what may happen at the 2 weeks later at the Scorpio full moon, because it is square Pluto, which to me is very important because, Pluto entering Aquarius, these outer planets, we really get to see what they're about when they're being aspected by the lunations. So we have a full moon in Scorpio. and I know you're one of my Scorpio sisters there.
Oh yeah.
Square that Pluto. Um, and I feel like, if we feel like we're in darkness around the solar eclipse period, then we may get some more information and things come to light about where we may really be determined to put our energy toward around that Scorpio full moon.
Yeah, I feel like there's still this spiritualization process that's like, that we are full on in during this whole time. When we think about kind of the spiritual incubator, because that Scorpio full moon is going to be ruled by Mars, who's getting ready to conjunct Neptune, and has just made a conjunction with Saturn, which is also very much a precursor for energy to come. Uh, as you know, Saturn is going to move ever closer to Neptune, and there's a whole story. There's all these diverging storylines that are coming in. So it's almost like there's much about this time period of life and these eclipses that are sort of like Grand Central Station. There's trains coming in, trains are coming out. There's changes on the destination, like just all that taking place. So, and really, what will be highlighted probably around that full moon, especially the day after, is one of the big things that's going on, especially around the eclipse, is the Jupiter Uranus conjunction. So that's when we were talking about kind of chaos earlier. Not to say that Jupiter Uranus is chaos, but I mean, we have the principles
Uranus
of
is
growth.
chaos.
Yeah, Uranus can be chaos. Yeah, we'll give Uranus that. But we do have the principles of growth and expansion and moving forward, and just a lot at one time. Jupiter is magnanimous, and then we put it with this chaotic, sort of erratic, but also awakening and innovative Uranus. And life is just a bag of surprises right now, and that's not always on the outside. That can be on the inside, sort of like what you were talking about earlier, when you're like, start with that. If you have it at the bottom of your chart, get into that foundation, because we can surprise ourselves, right? If we are at the doorstep of awakening for our future expansion, like, hop on that train, do that work, get get shaken up, get excited about what could be, and roll with the punches and be flexible if something's brought to you at the same time, because how you maneuver now is maybe important on a fateful sort of storyline,
Hmm.
if that makes sense.
Do you think so? When we look at, Mars gets into Aries,
Yes.
that should be about like the trigger where we may be able to, let me see, when does that happen? Boop, 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 forward. So what
So
is it,
that's
early
April
May?
30th.
Okay, let's
So
see.
April 30th, I believe.
April 30,
Yeah. So
29 or
April 3rd.
30.
And so what's
Mhm.
it? Yeah, that, and you hit the nail on the head there, because that's a big shift, with Mars moving into Aries, but also at the same time Venus moves into Taurus. So it's like both of
Mm,
and these are the rulers of the nodes, right? These are, and also
mhm.
our relationship planets, and they're moving into their respective domiciles. And the second Mars moves into Aries, we are going to feel everything that this Aries solar eclipse is bringing to us. And we're especially going to feel
Yes.
it when it gets to the North Node, when it gets to the actual degree of the solar eclipse.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but definitely prepare for, yeah, we're going to hit that April 30th. And then that's when that May energy comes on, right? We get into
Mm-hmm.
Taurus season. Venus is there, Jupiter and Uranus have met, and then there's a pile up, at the right before Gemini season of all that Taurus energy.
Mm-hmm.
And so, where is Aries and where is Taurus in your chart? Because wow, there's
Mm-hmm.
that's
Super
that's the
bloom.
spot. Yeah,
That's a spot.
super bloom. There is definitely that's the spot.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, so Mars gets to 19 Aries May 25th, right? So there is time. So it's almost like, I feel like the most frustration now is people being like, oh, there's all this Aries energy. I gotta launch the thing. I gotta get in action. I gotta blah, blah,
yeah.
blah, da, da. But it's like like, yes, honor that impulse, but the action could go kind of
Yeah,
wonky if we're not reflecting back some more, and but like you said, when at the end of April, right? Or
April.
was it
Yeah,
April, end of
April.
April into May, then that likely we feel more of a green light from the universe, right? Like we feel
Yeah.
more of just like we have to at least wait till Mars clears Neptune because that
Yes.
is like, whoa, whoa, what was I thinking? I can't do this. I'm like, I don't have the energy anymore.
It's like the Mars Pisces energy locking in with Saturn, because we got to remember, locking in with Saturn, this is locking in a 2-year cycle of like sort of committed energy and what we really want to put form around with our motivation. Neptune, Mars Neptune, this is releasing missions, releasing agendas, but also dreaming big. So we're in this sort of dream incubator and this formulation sort of you know yeah, it's almost like we're just holding spiritual space, and that's not easy for a lot of people. It's not easy for me,
Right.
and it can be
Yeah.
uncomfortable,
Yeah.
but we gotta wait for the divine spark. And I mean the divine spark of motivation, not the divine spark of inspiration, but motivation. And that is, to me, when Mars hits that 0 degrees Aries. And it's gonna be in all of us, and we're gonna see it on the world stage. Like it's gonna hit that world point,
Right.
because leaders are obviously very effective with eclipses. And
Mm-hmm.
there's so much going on right now. And even looking back in time, like these can be very volatile times, but they can be very empowering for us too. So I guess the old
Mm-hmm.
adage, wait for it.
Well, I know I had a astrology teacher that would always say for eclipses, wait and see, because we can't see when the solar
Yeah.
life force is eclipsed, right? We are all eclipsed in some way. Traditionally, the leaders are eclipsed. I mean, expect to see some leaders of some kind being,
Yes.
leaving, that especially the ones that we thought were strong and we thought were super powerful. Um, and we don't know who those are yet. We just need to be paying attention. And in our own lives, what old beliefs what ego beliefs, that we thought were running the show needs to take a back step to, as you said, the dream incubation, the self. So hopefully this will be a season for the real self to start to
Yeah.
emerge.
Yeah. And even just getting in touch with what that is. We might not know at this moment. Don't assume you know everything about yourself, because you could be surprised. And that's a wonderful thing. I mean, what's life without a little excitement?
And mystery.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, my dear. Well,
Exactly.
thank you so much. This has been so wonderful to reconnect with you after all this time. Don't remember how long it's been, but I'm so glad that we can reconnect with our shared love of astrology. So tell our friends again where they can find you.
Yes. So you can find me at energeticprinciples.com. You can find me the Energetic Principles podcast on anywhere you listen to podcasts, and also on YouTube. There's always video versions, which are fun to watch as we go through the charts. And if you want to book a personal consultation, you can do that on my website too. And of course, our project Tarot of Her, which is coming, it is in its own, formulation
Incubation.
incubator right now. But I'm very proud of this project. It's beautiful. I can't wait to see it come to life. So you can find out more about that at tarotofher.com. And it's pretty much sold out, the first edition, but there are going to be a few pre-sales that are going to come to the marketplace later this month. So if you are potentially interested in that, you're going to want to sign up on the mailing list at tarotofher.com, and you'll be the first to know when those few copies go live for purchase. So yeah,
Well,
energeticprinciples.com,
perfect.
tarotofher.com.
And don't forget to sign up to my free newsletter at radiantastrology.com/sign up. You can get your free weekly astrology insight, as well as get exclusive offers. I just wrapped my solar eclipse readings that I really just pretty much promoted through my email list. And I had more than enough, and I recently closed them because I wanted everyone who got them to have enough time to listen to them, reflect on the insights and the guidance in time for the solar eclipse. I do not do readings on solar eclipses just because to me they are just way too wild cards. I do beforehand, right? So keep that in mind for the next eclipse season. But in the meantime, I hope to see you online at Radiant Astrology on Instagram. And again, thank you, Melissa, for joining me. And have a blessed eclipse.
Yeah, thank you for having me.